The global index funds that I invest in on a regular basis have never been valued higher than they are right now, give or take a little bit. Same for the American markets. The S&P 500 is basically at all-time highs.
A record run here for the S&P.
Record highs.
Record highs.
If we dig under the hood, we see that the performance of the S&P 500, the whole American market, even the global stock market, is being driven by a handful of mega companies whose values have just touched heights never seen before. Peter Lynch famously said,
"There's always something to worry about."
So should we be worried about throwing our money into these index investments at all-time highs? Should we instead wait for the inevitable pullback before we invest? That is what we're going to discuss today. Well, that and pole vaulting. I hope that's okay with you.
We're being pulled back in time.
It's 1983.
Welcome from Helsinki. This magnificent stadium hosts today the first...
Helsinki hosts the World Athletics Championships. And as titans of track and field like Carl Lewis do their thing, a little-known pole vaulter called Sergei Bubka snatches gold in a surprise victory. This victory would start a trend of complete dominance of the sport for the next decade.
Oh, the world record has gone!
This guy was good. So good, in fact, it's said that his competition essentially gave up competing against him. This posed a problem for his sponsors, Nike, who would typically pay out every time an athlete won. But this guy always wins, so what do? How about, instead of paying him to compete with everyone else, we pay him to compete with himself? Nike didn't incentivize Bubka to go higher in the competition than his competitors, but higher than anyone's ever been before.
So it's a new world record height for Bubka. Oh, and he goes clear!
$100,000 every time he broke a world record. Bubka was as financially savvy as he was good at flinging himself in the air. So, do you know what he did? He set the world record for the men's pole vault around 35 times during his career. Just moved it up 1 centimetre at a time.
2 world records in 2 successive vaults.
200 G's for that much space.
Oh, the world record has gone!
While I'm sure that Nike were happy with their athlete, you can't help but feel that they might have underestimated his potential to keep going higher. Bubka was the first man to ever cross the 6-metre range. When you compare that to the first official record of 3.15 metres set by Francis Temple in 1849, seems like a ridiculous achievement. This constant progression of the pole vault world record over the years demonstrates how in all walks of life we continue to doubt the potential of humans to reach greater heights. And this is something that is core to our discussion today.
Okay, now we'll get to the important stuff.
Of the 1,176 months since January 1926, the American market has been at all-time highs in 354 of them, 30% of the time. Since 1950, the S&P 500 has set 1,250 all-time highs. That means it's averaged about 17 a year. That's what this looks like by decade. So it's clear that all-time highs happen all of the time. And I think that's the first thing to understand here. They're not unusual, even though the media likes to make a massive song and dance about them when they happen.
Record run.
Record highs.
Record highs.
What I want to understand now, though, is following an all-time high when the market is at its peak, is that a good time to buy? Looking backwards, which I know is no indication of what might happen going forwards, but it's all we've got. What are the chances that investors who buy at an all-time high end up down in the years following? We'll be using the S&P 500 again for this because the data is widely available and because the American market currently makes up about 65% of the global stock market. So it's going to be crashes in this market that leads to declines in portfolio performance. I buy a global index myself, and below I've linked a document that goes over the most popular global and American funds on each of the major brokers in the UK if you want a copy. These 3 pie charts put together by RBC Global Asset Management look how likely it was for the S&P 500 to be down more than 10% from all-time highs at different time periods. So take any all-time high since 1950, go out 12 months, and there's a 9% chance that you're down 10% or more. Extend that timeline to 3 years, and the chances are only 2%, and at 5 years, the chances of your portfolio dropping 10% from an all-time high was 0. Time with investing, as always, is your friend here, and longer time horizons tend to correct for bad luck if you're a person that invested at an all-time high and then markets decline. But even still, a 9% chance over a 12-month period is pretty good odds. But many investors are still apprehensive, it would seem. Research of 10,000 retail investors by eToro found that 39% of them are actively increasing their cash positions at the minute, with the trend among younger investors being the highest, where 60% are focusing on cash holdings. Higher interest rates on cash are clearly an attractive proposition, especially if it's from emergency funds, fine. But I do worry that younger investors are seeing higher returns in cash as an opportunity and not realising that at their age it's the very best time to be taking risk and putting your money to work in the stock market. I found this bit of research from Schroders that it's a bit of a weird scenario that they go through that probably is quite unlikely, but I still think it serves to prove a point perfectly. They took an investing timeline of 100 years from 1923 to 2023 and said, if you plonked $100 at the start and left it, what would it be worth? The answer's $85,000 roughly today. Okay, next they said, anytime the market was at all-time highs, at the end of the month, let's move out our investments into cash until it isn't at all-time highs. They call it a switching strategy. So you switch out of stocks into cash equivalent that you generate interest on, and then you put it back in when the market has pulled back from the all-time high. Essentially, you look to miss the inevitable dip. What would that do to performance? The answer is a 90% decline in the value of your investments over the period, with this switching strategy leading to a portfolio of $8,790. With markets at all-time highs and cash saving rates being the best they've been in years, I can see why investors might say, well, I'll just wait and get my interest here. But this cautious approach fails to recognise that all-time highs are very common and that markets tend to perform well after the market has reached an all-time high. Bubka hitting a world record was not a sign of him reaching human potential, more an indication that the human species had the ability to go even higher. It's often typical when a world record is broken that then it's broken again in quick succession straight after. Look at another set of elite athletes in the sport of Tetris. I know that sounds like I'm taking the piss, but honestly, I watched a documentary on these guys the other days. They are athletes. They are doing mad shit with Tetris. It was thought that the game was impossible to complete. That's until this teenager did it, 34 years after the game was invented. And then, just 3 weeks later, 2 other players have beaten the game. 3.5 decades and no one had come close. Then 3 separate people do it in 3 weeks. All-time highs lead to all-time highs because it gives those playing the sport, game, or markets the confidence that it is possible. The logic of, it's high at the minute, so it will drop soon, kind of doesn't stack up. You can see here that the 12 months following an all-time high, US large cap companies have their best average performance. So in the 12-month period after the all-time high, this is when, on average, these companies perform best. Being out of the market and waiting for things to come down means you potentially miss out on this favourable trend. I question if people sitting on all this cash waiting for a crash have considered the fact that 12 months after an all-time high tends to be a good time to be in the market. Look, I think it's very natural to be concerned when markets are at all-time highs that you're buying at the wrong time. But serious question, let's say the market started tailing down now and did that for 12 months. Would you then be sat there going, well, now's the perfect time to buy, this is what I've been waiting for? Or would you just be sitting there going, oh God, I think I'll wait for things to recover a little bit before I get involved? Are your concerns genuine or are they just born out of fear? Coming back to that quote from Peter Lynch.
There's always something to worry about.
I purposely framed that negatively to make it sound like a negative quote, but let me just play you a section from his famous speech.
We stop worrying about it. I mean, there's always something to worry about. In the 50s, it was depression and nuclear war. The 50s was the best decade of the century, except for the 80s.
There's always something to worry about with investing, something that you can point to convince yourself to not participate. Threats of nuclear war, famine, oil prices, Liz Truss. Let's not make the fact that the markets are doing better than they've ever done before one of those things. People have been asking this question now for decades. I mean, just on YouTube alone, you see videos stretching back years trying to answer if the current market high at the time was a good time to buy. The answer as we sit here today at current all-time highs was, of course, yes, it was a good time to buy. There will be periods of underperformance, of course. There will be periods when the value of your investments falls versus what you've put in. And you might go years between new all-time highs, but eventually we will hit new all-time highs. Records will be set. Sergei Bubka's legacy, his impact on the sport of pole vaulting, sits there for all to see. A period of complete dominance as one man rose above his sport to become a towering figure in post-Soviet Ukraine. One of the greatest athletes of all time. But as is so often the case, what follows new heights can often be great falls. Bubka's record in the eyes of the Ukrainian people has been tarnished by his connections to Russia. A name that once represented freedom and potential now sits in the mud. But what of Bubka's records? Remember, this man was so dominant that his competitors saw it as almost pointless to compete. So, was that it? Was that the summit of the sport? I don't think so.
Speaking of world records, Duplantis. Is it on? Oh, that's ridiculous!
The current world record for the pole vault is 10 centimetres higher than Bubka ever achieved. And do we think it will stop there? Do we think that athletes, the markets, or even the human species won't just keep finding ways to raise that bar?
On your marks, get set, go! market started to rally and rallied sharply.
And Gunnell comes through to take the world title.
Packages of $5, $10, and $50 million at a time.
The upturn will stop.